Three, two, one, action.
Hey, everybody, this is Seth. Welcome back to the Travel Smith Co. podcast and YouTube channel. So, we're starting a new series today. We're going to have a several episode journey going through what it would be like to go on a journey. Just everything from prepping to traveling to layovers to arriving in your destination to what to do while you were there, all the way back to whenever you return home. So, several episodes coming up just on the same theme where we kind of break this idea down into several different segments, kind of beginning, continuing on, middle, and then end as we go through what it looks like to go on a trip somewhere. So, today is the first episode in that series. We're going to be discussing the prep work that goes into going on a trip. Not really the most glorious part of the trip. A lot of people would really rather not deal with it at all. However, if you are able to do it well, it actually makes a massive difference to the trip. It makes a big difference of how smoothly the trip goes, and depending on your personality, how stressed you may be during the trip as well, depending on if you're a throw caution to the wind, I'll figure things out as they go, or if you want to have every detail planned, the prepping is really important to having a good trip and the foundation of that. So as we get on to this first episode of this series, the first thing that you need for any trip is figuring out, where am I going to go? When am I going to go? And am I going to travel while I am there? So we talked about in the last few episodes a while back the three different areas: the having the flexibility of your time, the destination flexibility, and your budget. All of those factors to deciding where you're going to go and when you're going to go. Something else that does make a big impact on your prep is, am I going to go to one location and stay there, or will I travel once I get to my initial destination? So I have done this both ways. I have gone on trips where I travel to one city and I'm here, or one destination and I'm here, I'm staying here, I'll walk around the city, I'll walk around whatever the location is, I'm there, but I don't leave, and then I will go back home from there. I've also done it where I fly into one country and have decided that I'm going to visit half a dozen countries on this trip. I'll buy a round trip ticket to that country and then go from that country to my next country, to my next country, to my next country, ending the loop back in the original country I started at, so that I can have my round trip ticket back home to get me there. That's just typically the more budget friendly way of doing that. So those are the first three things that you got to figure out. Where am I going to go? When am I going to go? And will I travel while I'm there, or will I stay in one place? So the next thing that you're going to want to do after that, always check the visa requirements. There's such a wide range of visa requirements depending on your nationality, your passport status. Everything from, oh, I don't need a visa at all, I just show up, to, well, I can get a visa on arrival, I pay X number of dollars, bring cash, pay them pay them the cash. They put a sticker in my passport, and I'm good to go. Europe and the UK for a long time were pretty easy for US nationals to go to. It's still easy to go. Both of them are in process of have really just recently implementing a process of needing some security checks beforehand, where it's still technically free for the visa, but you have to pay to have some security checks done before you go. Something to just be aware of for that. But making sure that you know what your visa status is. I was on a trip one time with several friends who were American and one friend who was not, trying to get into a country, and it was really easy for the Americans, but the other friend actually needed a visa beforehand, and he had a lot of trouble with that. So just do a quick check, Google quickly, do Americans or whatever your nationality is need a visa to go to X? And it will save you so much time and hassle and so much prep work if you do this even before you start looking at flights or lodging, because if you can't get into the country, you don't need a flight there. Just very basic things on that. But something that we don't always think about. So always check for visa first, then you can move on to booking flights and booking lodging. I had discussed a little bit about this before with, I believe we had an episode on Google Flights and other methods for looking at flight options, for looking at hotels versus hostels. And I do recommend booking those similar to the same time. You don't want to have booked your flight, looking at hotel options, and realizing all of a sudden, oh, well, those hotel rooms I wanted at that price are no longer available. It's going to be twice the price. Or vice versa. You don't want to book a hotel and then realize, well, the flight to get there has doubled in price. So if you can book those about the same time is typically what I try to do, just to make sure I don't lose a bunch of money on that. Something else that is worthwhile doing is to double check your dates whenever you are purchasing these things. I learned this the hard way. The second time I ever booked a trip, I had gone to the UK and I was booking a side trip from there. And I was going to do a trip that went to Ireland and to Italy, to Rome. And so I had booked a flight to Ireland, a flight to Rome, and then a flight back to the UK where I was staying at the time. Got ready to go, printed off my boarding passes, and realized that my flight from Ireland to Rome actually left an hour before my flight arrived into Ireland from the UK. I had, in all of the work I had done, I had mixed up a date somewhere and purchased the flight on the wrong day. Thankfully, I caught that before I made it all the way to Ireland, and then didn't have a way to make it back to the UK. But it is something worthwhile just to double check all of your dates, write them down somewhere, double check all of it as you are going. Can save you a lot of time and money and hassle in that if you're able to double check your dates before you get ready to go. So moving on, you've decided where you're going to go, you've decided when you're going to go, you've got your tickets, you've got your lodging, you've figured all of this out. Something that you really have to think through is, in this logistical step that's next, is how am I going to get to the airport? So depending on what airport you're flying out of, this is a massive difference. It could be, hey, I hop on the train, metro goes straight there, that's great. Or it might be, hey, I live 2 hours from the nearest airport. Am I going to have to park there? Is someone going to drop me off? Figuring out all of the situation. Do I pay for parking? Do I pay for an Uber to go? What's going to be the most financially efficient way, really? Is parking there going to be the best way? Am I going to be able to have a friend pick me up? What time do I need to leave to get to the airport? What time do I need to arrive to be there for the flight? Some airports, depending on the size of the airport and if you're traveling internationally or not, there are some airports you need to be there 3.5 hours beforehand if they're swamped for the season. There's sometimes that there's small airports I've been to that if you show up more than 90 minutes before your flight, no one is there to check you in until 90 minutes before. So just do a little bit of legwork on the front end of that, and can save you a lot of uncomfortable waiting at the beginning of your trip, or the possibility of you missing your flight if you get there and aren't able to get through security because it's absolutely slammed and you can't make it to your flight on time. So, something else to be thinking through with those logistics as you're planning, what do I need for this logistical things, is looking at your layovers. If you have a direct flight, that's awesome. I have not had the privilege of having a lot of direct flights in my life. A lot of times, whenever I'm going somewhere, I have at least one layover, sometimes two or three. Sometimes you have a really short layover, and that's great. Sometimes you might have a very long one. One of the longer ones I had, one time I had a layover in Dubai that was, I believe, 18 hours. And so that's a very different than if you have an hour and a half layover. So figuring out, do I have long layovers? What am I available? What will be available to me at the airport if I do have those? So just thinking through all of those different variables. And then also the logistics of, I have arrived at my final destination airport. How do I get to where I'm staying? How do I get to my hotel or my Airbnb, whatever this happens to be? Will I rent a car? Do I need an international license if I rent a car? Do I have those things? Can I get them there? Is there a metro service, either a bus or a train or a taxi that runs directly to the airport? What is the best way to go about that? Each location is different. So if you just do a quick search of that specific location, you'll find out what are the different options for that. So that's kind of the logistical side of the nitty gritty. How do I get to and from the airport? That is worthwhile thinking through before you actually leave to go to the airport. Have that stuff planned out. After you have figured out all of that, you can kind of move on to some prepping for like the local place where you will be. Um, there is a massive difference depending on your location of what you will need. So something that I always try to start off with is the most basic. Is the water safe and or good to drink where I'm going? If you go someplace, say in Europe, most likely it's going to be fine to drink the water, depending on the country. Might even have very good water. Some places like Scotland or Switzerland or some of these places have a reputation for having really good tap water, like high quality tap water that is great to drink. Some places, maybe the water is okay, but not so great. It just tastes bad. Some places you could get sick if you drink it. So always just do a search on if the water is safe to drink, figuring out if you're going to walk while you're in your destination, if you're going to walk everywhere, if you're going to use public transportation, what does that look like? Does it cost a lot of money? Is there a pass I need to get to do this? Where does it go? Because even if you use public transportation, you're going to have to walk some. So how far is it worth walking on the public to get to the public transportation? How far is the public transportation going to get me? Other really practical things to be thinking about: where am I going to eat? Have at least a couple ideas in advance before you get there, if it is a safe place to eat there or not. How safe is it to be in the city or these parts of town at night? Or are there just even parts of town I don't want to go in at all? Is there certain places I should stay in or certain places I should avoid? Are there any local customs or rules that I should know? Another really good one that I have learned over the years is knowing beforehand what is the exchange rate, and so how much should things cost. We were in Prague one time and had gone to a market. Was getting ready to eat some food at the local market, and realized that everyone around them was using the euro, but they have their own currency there, and they had some prices set up above the food vendor. But what wasn't as clear was that the prices were per 100 grams and were in the local currency. And so when you did all the math out, what it actually worked out to was a little spot where you'd go and order food and stand to eat it cost about $40 to $50 for a bowl of mashed potatoes and a small slab of pork, like roasted pork. And so a lot of people didn't really realize that and were just shopping there and doing that, not realizing the cost. A few people while I was there, including myself, actually realized what the actual cost was and got out of line as we were watching other people go through. And so there's just certain things to keep in mind about knowing the exchange rate and what the normal cost of things would be, just so you're not caught unawares and are able to not have to figure that out on the fly as much, and you don't get caught in an uncomfortable situation with the exchange rate. Another area that is really useful to have some preparation in is if you're going to do any adventuring. So if you are not just walking around the city or wherever your destination is, but thinking through what are the things I want to see and do while I'm in this location. Is there anything that I need to do? Do I need special clothing, special equipment? Do I need warm weather, cold weather, etc.? So, for example, I used to travel quite a bit, and so whenever we were traveling together, my wife would always want to wear her really nice shoes that she was comfortable in and that she thought would go with her outfit very well, until we were hiking one day on the Isle of Skye, and hit a section of the trail that was a little bit rougher, and she kind of just started sliding a little bit on the rocks, and I would have to go a few steps and kind of plant myself using the hiking shoes I was wearing, and then hold her hand and help her come down a little bit. And so we were able to get through that okay. But she learned after that that it was worthwhile to have a pair of hiking shoes, even if they didn't match the look that she was hoping to go for as much. And so now, whenever we travel, we have hiking shoes to be able to walk around on that, because it's not worth matching your outfit if you end up sliding off a trail on a mountain. So, just thinking through these things of what is the equipment that I need, and thinking through if there's any must tries in the area, anything that the location is known for that I really need to try this, whether that's a hiking trail, whether that's a coffee shop, whether it's a local food that you should try, or in some cases, if you need to avoid it, if there's certain local foods and places that could be a little bit too adventurous for you, know that before you go so you know what not to order. The last thing as far as the adventure prepping that I would say is checking to see if there's any quote unquote official tours that are worth doing. In general, we are not big tour people. We don't like being in tour groups, but occasionally we will do an exception to that and do a day tour somewhere. The reality is, people go to these tour sites for a reason, because they're really cool. And some of them, it's very difficult to get to these sites on your own. So there are occasions where we will do a day tour with a group somewhere, just for the ability to actually get to see this amazing location. And would recommend doing that in certain cases, even if you're not a big tour person. I'm not, but it is worth being able to see something as part of a tour versus not being able to see it at all. So just do a little research of if there's any official tours that you want to be part of, even if for the most part you're doing a trip that is off the beaten path. As far as packing goes, as the next item to prepare, to be thinking through as you're getting ready for your trip, the first big question is, well, what am I allowed? What is my luggage allowance? How many pounds or kilos is it? It always varies, not always, but there's a couple of times it varies. There was one airline we flew that in their fine print mentioned that their weight limit for a checked bag was actually 40 pounds. And so thankfully I had seen that. And so we'd go and checked in and we were fine. We had 40 pounds. But the people right next to us had assumed that, oh, well, all the airlines are 50 pounds. So we'll just pack 50 pounds. And so they had to pay an overweight bag fee for that. So just know what the actual allowance is, first off. And then pair that with, well, what do I actually need? So it makes a really big difference if you're thinking through, well, whenever I land, I'm going to take the metro, I'm going to take a train or a bus. So comparing what I'm allowed to bring with me versus what I'm going to actually need, and holding that up to how far am I going to have to transport this by myself. So if I am taking a bus from the airport and the bus drops me off 3/4 of a mile from my hotel or Airbnb, well, then I have to think through everything I'm packing. I'm going to bring 3/4 of a mile to this, and then 3/4 of a mile when I go back. And so that might not be so bad if that's your destination. It might also not be the only thing to consider if you're doing a trip with multiple stops, multiple locations, where if it is a trip like I mentioned earlier that I've been on, where say I'm going to visit half a dozen different locations, well, maybe my first hotel is only a 1/4 mile away from the train station, and I'll just walk that 1/4 mile. But then I also have to consider I'm going to walk a 1/4 mile back to the train station, take that train to a next city, and in that city, well, maybe I have to walk a 1/4 mile to a bus stop, ride a bus, and then walk a half mile from that bus stop to where I'm going to stay. And then I have to go a half mile back to the bus stop when I'm leaving, go to my next spot, and walk 3/4 of a mile to my next lodging. And so all of these things add up over time. So just figuring out, what do I actually need? What am I willing to tote around with me for this trip? If I'm only staying in one spot, my threshold is a lot higher for what I'm willing to pack around with me than if I'm going to be lugging the suitcase all around Europe with me. So just keep that in mind as you're balancing that of, what am I allowed to bring versus what do I need and what do I want to carry around with me. I had a friend tell me one time I was getting ready to go on a trip and mentioned I wasn't sure if I had everything packed. And he gave me some really good advice as far as traveling goes and said, well, do you have your passport and a credit card? I said, yeah. So, okay, well, if you're going, depending on where you're going, I was going to Europe. And so if you're going someplace like Europe and you have a passport and a credit card, you can get a long ways. If you forget your toothbrush, run down to the store and you can buy a toothbrush. It's no big deal. Now, there are some places that's not the case. If you are going to some more remote locations, you want to be very careful about what you bring because you might not be able to just go buy some extra toothpaste or an extra pair of pants. But that is something that is worthwhile to take into account as you are planning for your packing. Another thing that you want to consider is not just the clothing and other items you need, but do I need snacks or food for this location? And if that's the case, how much and what kind? Is it a location that I can get all kinds of food there? Or is it a location I've actually chosen because I want to eat there? If so, you probably don't need as many snacks. You're still going to want some for the plane and for some backup as an emergency type of situation if you get hungry. But you might not need as much as if you're going to say go hiking in the Incan jungle in Peru and you need food because that's all that you have. You're not going to have access to food along the way. So you might need to adjust that based on what your trip is going to be, but consider how much food and what kind of food you're going to want to bring with you. Now, as far as carry ons go, what do I want to have access to on the flight? So you got your check bag, it's down in the hold. You're not going to be able to access that. But what do I want in my carry on? You definitely are going to want at least a couple of changes of clothes for a couple of days, just in case your luggage is lost. Always do that. I've known of people who didn't do that and sorely regretted it and showed up in pretty remote places with nothing but the clothes on their back. So always have a little bit of extra clothing with you, as well as anything else you would want access to on the flight. I actually enjoy having something I call it like a tearaway bag. So it's just either a small drawstring bag or something else that I keep in the top of either my personal item or my carry-on, that when I get on the plane, I can just kind of rip that out of my bag. I can store the rest of my stuff either above in the overhead bin or underneath the seat, but I can have that small bag with me with things like headphones, snack, an eye mask, something for entertainment, but all the stuff that I want just throughout the time I'm sitting on the plane. Just having this little small bag that is separate that you can pull out at the last minute once you are on the flight to have access to on the plane, give you something to do. So the last thing as far as packing goes that you would want to consider is, do I have room for souvenirs? And so, of course, figuring that out, you're going to have to know what kind of souvenirs you want, the type of thing you would enjoy bringing back with you. But you don't want to pack so full that if you're hoping to bring back a fun shirt from somewhere or a coffee mug or a big box of chocolate, whatever it is, that you have room to actually fit it in your luggage. So that can be a challenge if you're going light. A lot of times we like to pack light and just use backpacks. And so that can be a bit of a challenge in that way, but just figuring out, hey, what kind of souvenirs will I want to bring back with me, and making sure that you will have room to add that to your pack or your luggage in some way. The last thing that I like to do whenever I am prepping for a trip is figuring out what I need for my electronics, getting my electronics ready, whether it is looking into an international SIM card, if I'm going to do that, downloading some maps on Google Maps, downloading languages or entertainment. And we have a whole nother episode just on what to do for the electronics, but you want to make sure you actually get that done beforehand to have all of the stuff downloaded, ready to go in case you decide you want it on the flight and you don't have service or Wi-Fi on the flight, or maybe you get to an international layover and you don't have Wi-Fi or service there. Just figuring out ahead of time what all you will want for that. Making sure that you have your itinerary, directions to and from your hotels, etc. Any reference codes or booking codes, key codes to get into any housing. Just making sure all of that is saved on your phone and having that somewhere that you can have access to it. Maybe for some of those, even a printout if you get very nervous about having your phone die and needing a booking reference or a key code or anything like that, you could even print that off. So those are several of the ways that I like to prep for a trip. Just be able to have all of that lined out beforehand gives you a lot of peace of mind, knowing what to expect a little bit for your layovers, for your transit, and all of that. But it is a good foundational start for any trip as you're getting ready for your journey. So thank you guys for listening. Hope that this has been helpful to you, and we will see you next time on the podcast.